Alright, welcome to the part 2 of our video lecture on Chapter 10, Crimes Against Persons Other Than Homicide. So we talked, the first video focused exclusively on sexual assault. Don't forget to look through some of the examples in the book as far as differences between intrinsic and extrinsic force. Particularly, those examples are really helpful. We're going to talk briefly about statutory rape here. Statutory rape is a strict liability crime in almost every state, which means we don't need a mens rea. It is usually defined as carnal knowledge with someone who's under the age of consent. There is no force requirement or threat of force requirement for statutory rape. If you are above the age of consent and you have sex with someone who's under the age of consent, then you are guilty of statutory rape. A couple of places do permit a reasonable mistake of age, but that is not Indiana. That is only in Alaska and Hawaii. Now, Indiana does have what's called the Romeo and Juliet exception. So if you were dating before the first person turned over the age of consent, usually that is sufficient to negate the statutory rape charge. Alright, and we've talked about statutory rape a few times. Now, the last sexual assault offense is criminal sexual contact. This is when an employer, a classmate, a healthcare worker, a date, or someone else you know hugs, fondles, strokes, kisses, or otherwise touches you when you don't want them to. So this is a general intent crime. The actus reus is the hugging, fondling, stroking, kissing, touching, and there's a circumstance element here for without your consent. This is usually one of the lowest levels of sexual assault offenses. It's just unwanted touching on its own. Okay. All right. If you have any questions on sexual assault, let me know. Otherwise, we're going to shift our focus over to bodily injury and threats of bodily injury. So here we have two main crimes, assault, battery and assault. So under the common law, these were separate crimes. Most states have kind of collapsed them into two, and we generally refer to them just as assaults. But they are not quite the same thing, and we're going to talk about them separately at first. So, battery. Let's talk about the elements of battery. So, this is the actus reus of unlawful touching. Okay. The mens rea can be purposeful, reckless, or negligent without the victim's consent. We need to have causation here and some bodily injury for a battery. So battery is unwanted and unjustified offensive touching. Okay. Now, the key thing here is not all touching is unlawful. We just saw that husbands can have sex with their wives when they're unconscious. In the first video, spanking your kids the kids don't want that, but that is not unlawful. So, batteries, but the really important thing here is a battery does require some injury. Battery has to have an injury. It can be a minor physical injury, it can be emotional distress, and we'll go ahead and note that batteries are largely misdemeanors. Okay, they're largely misdemeanors in most states. If the battery causes a serious bodily injury, then it would be a felony. But for those minor injuries, misdemeanor, serious bodily injury, felony. Now, we're going to compare that with an assault. So an assault is an attempted or threatened battery. So the actus reus here is a substantial step towards completing a battery, or voluntary acts that frighten the victim. The mens rea is the intent to commit a battery or the intent to frighten. So these have a specific intent here. You need to intend to commit the battery. Purposeful. Or you need to intend to frighten your victim, also purposeful, usually. So these are specific intent. We need causation. So the the steps towards the battery or the threat need to result in the fear, in the fear. Okay, so there is not necessarily a physical injury for an assault. One thing we do want to note is that conditional threats are not usually enough because they are not an immediate threat. So kind of similar to when we talk about self-defense, where it needed to be right now. If you like that Romeo and Juliet example we used, where he threatened to he was going to kill her when the baby was born, and we said that wasn't an immediate threat. Same kind of thing applies for assault. So there does need to be some immediacy to it. Assault, as far as like degrees and types, I guess the last thing, the victim does need to be aware of the assault. If they're, they need to, because the harm is that they're frightened, or they experience fear. And so if the victim is completely unaware that you're charging at them, intending to tackle them out of nowhere because they're back, they can't see you running up to them because then no assault has occurred. There does need to be some awareness. Now if they turn around just in time to see you like almost knock them over and jump out of the way, then we would have an assault. Okay. Now, as far as how we punish an assault, because remember up here, largely misdemeanors unless we have a serious bodily injury. For an assault, under modern statutes, we have multiple degrees of assault. Now, common assaults or misdemeanor assaults, there is a misdemeanor assault, but any assault that has the intent to commit a violent felony, like a homicide, a rape or a robbery, would be a felony. An assault with a deadly weapon is a felony. An assault on certain classes of individuals, like police officers, are all felonies. But it is possible to have a common or a simple assault. And the simple assault would usually be classified as a misdemeanor. Okay. Now, your book doesn't have any examples of assault and battery, but I am going to pull up a couple right here. So our first one, David throws a stone at Goliath while Goliath is sleeping, intending to injure him, but David misses. Is David guilty of a criminal assault? Come down here. Yes, he is. Even though Goliath was sleeping, this is still an attempted battery. So, because he threw something at him, attempted battery, regardless kind of the fact that Goliath was sleeping. Now, in my earlier example, if he had run at him intending to tackle or maybe punch him and he was asleep, we maybe don't have that here. But because he threw a rock and missed, we have an attempted battery. Okay. Which is an assault, remember. Attempted battery is an assault. If you complete your battery, then it's a battery. Okay. So our next example, Mother Goose sends one of her kids to Briar Rabbit with a bottle of medicine, in quotes. Rabbit takes the medicine and becomes violently ill because of the action, mild poison, deliberately mislabeled by Mother Goose. Is Mother Goose guilty of a battery? And the answer here is yes. This is a touching, because thinking definition to a battery is, I'll flip back my page, unwanted and unjustified offensive touching. And that occurred here. The touching was in a harmful and unwanted way because Mother Goose caused the poison to be administered to Briar Rabbit. So this is a battery. And this is an assault. Okay, so assault, battery, that's kind of how they're different. Now most modern most modern statutes do collapse batteries into assault, and we just define them that way. So that's usually how we talk about it now. All right, domestic violence. In the 1970s, domestic violence transformed from kind of an at-home problem to a criminal justice problem, and so we see that in our criminal justice system a lot. Most states define first and second offenses as misdemeanors with really low jail time, and your book has a great example of it. Now, another crime against persons is stalking. This is the voluntary act of following, pursuing, spying, harassing, and or threatening that occurs more than one time with purposeful mens rea to commit that purposeful actus reus and causing a result either purposely, recklessly, or negligently. The harm here is that you place the victim in fear. And so here's those elements of stalking. Now we're going to shift focus one last time to personal restraint crimes. So personal restraint crimes, the two big ones are kidnapping and false imprisonment. Kidnapping has an actus reus of seizing and carrying away the victim. This is called asportation, and you do not have to move the victim very far. The example in your book has somebody moving the victim just down the driveway in a car, so a few feet, and that's sufficient. As long as you seize and carry away the victim, you have completed the actus reus for kidnapping. This is a specific intent crime where you want to confine or significantly restrain or hold the victim in secret. So any one of those intents would satisfy the elements of kidnapping. So as far as this, kidnapping can be 2 degrees. Simple kidnapping is a misdemeanor, and and then there's aggravated kidnapping. Simple kidnapping can be a misdemeanor. It can also be a low-level felony. It really depends on what's going on outside of just the actual kidnapping. Kidnappings almost never occur just in isolation in practice. Things that make a kidnapping aggravated are sexual assaults, obtaining a hostage, trying to seek a ransom, things like that. So the penalty for an aggravated kidnapping like that, where you are holding someone hostage, you're trying to get a ransom, you're terrorizing the victim, is life in prison. And even for the kidnapping in your book, where he just moved her down the driveway, he was convicted of a felony. Now, the last crime we need to talk about is the crime of false imprisonment. So false imprisonment is the lesser form of kidnapping. So this would usually be how we classify the misdemeanor of kidnapping in most statutes. And so false imprisonment is depriving another person of their personal liberty without the asportation requirement. So this is kind of depriving someone of movement without carrying them away. Duct taping someone to a chair is false imprisonment in and on its own. Usually the victim isn't held for very long. If they were held for a more lengthy amount of time, most prosecutors would move forward with a kidnapping charge instead. And someone has kind of defined it as compelling a person to remain where they do not wish to remain. So that's kind of what depriving them of their liberty to move generally looks like. Threat of force is enough. It does not necessarily have to be physical restraint here, so just threatening them if they move that this harm will happen to them, and then believing that would be sufficient to complete the criminal act. And this is a specific intent crime. You need to intend to deprive your victim's liberty. If you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to reach out. I look forward to hearing from you.